Okay, we're looking at the second part of our review. I'm just going to go ahead and plug some of these numbers in here since they don't print very well when I switch over to this format. We got a 60-degree angle here, a 10 here, 5 here, and an X here. And what this is saying is find the value. So one thing we need to realize is this is a 30, 60, 90 triangle. And some of the rules for 30, 60, 90, the short leg's opposite the short angle, which would make this the short leg. The hypotenuse, of course, is across the 90-degree angle, and the long leg is across the 60-degree angle. So the rules for this, if we're going short leg to hypotenuse, we multiply by 2. If we're going from hypotenuse to short leg backwards the other way, of course we do the opposite, which is divide by 2. If we are going short leg to long leg, we multiply by radical 3, and of course the opposite would be long leg to short leg, we would divide by radical 3. Now notice that my variable is my long leg. I have my short leg, so to go from short leg to long leg, that would be right here. I'm going to multiply my short leg by radical 3. My short leg is 5. 5 times radical 3 is 5 radical 3, and that's my answer. A little shortcut, no need to use trig ratios. We're able to do that. So now we have another one. This time, though, we don't have a 30, 60, 90 triangle. In fact, this angle is 50, not really a special angle. This one is 6. This one is X, what we're looking for. Here's my right angle. So my hypotenuse is here. If we're using 50, we're going to use a trig ratio here. So we've got 50. 6 is adjacent, and X is opposite that angle. These are the two I'm working with, so what ratio uses that? SOHCAHTOA tangent ratio uses opposite over adjacent. So the tangent ratio of my angle, which is 50 degrees, is equal to opposite X over adjacent 6. So now we solve for X. And if you solve for X, of course, what we're going to have to do is multiply both sides by 6. Cancels that out. 6 times tangent 50 equals X. Round to the nearest tenth, you should get 7.2. All right, number 3. Special triangle. Notice it's 45 degree. That means we have a 45, 45, 90 triangle. 14. Now 14 is my hypotenuse. Now I don't have a short leg or a long leg because my legs are congruent to each other. The rules for 45, 45, 90, if I go from leg to hypotenuse, I multiply by radical 2. If I go from hypotenuse to leg, I divide by radical 2. And in this case, you'll notice I have my hypotenuse. I need to find my leg, which means we're going to divide by 2. So I take the hypotenuse, which is 14, I divide it by radical 2. You could plug that in your calculator or just multiply it by radical 2 over radical 2, which on top we end up with 14 radical 2. Radical 2 times radical 2 is going to give us 2. I can reduce this fraction. 14 divided by 2 is 7. And then I still have my radical 2, and that would be your answer for number 3. All right, number 4. A bird watcher spied a woodpecker. Bird watcher is 40 yards lower, so basically we know we're going to have a triangle. We know it's going to have a right angle. The bird watcher is 40 yards lower, so vertical length is going to be 40. The distance from the bird watcher to the woodpecker is 175 yards. Okay, so here's the bird watcher down here in this lower section. The bird is up here. That's how far apart they are. What is the angle of elevation? We're looking for an angle measure. When you're looking for an angle measure, you know you're going to use the inverse. Now what parts do we have in relationship to this angle? Well, this is going to be the hypotenuse. 40 is opposite. That's going to be sine ratio. So we're going to do the sine inverse, which you hit second on your calculator, hit second sine, then put the sine ratio in, which would be opposite over hypotenuse. And when you do that, it will give you the angle measure. Round to the nearest degree, x equals 13 degrees. Okay, number 5, similar situation. We've got a triangle, right angle. A hiker stops to rest, sees a deer in the distance. The hiker is 48 yards, so that's 48 vertical lower than the deer. Angle of elevation from the hiker to the deer is 15 degrees. Find the distance from the hiker, who's down here, to the deer, which is up here. That distance is what I don't know. Very similar to the last question. In reference to this angle, that's of course my hypotenuse, and 48 is opposite that. Same thing here. Sine ratio. So the sine of 15 degrees is equal to the sine ratio of opposite 48 over hypotenuse, which is x. Shortcut, you recall, if we're dividing by the variable, we're going to end up with x equaling 48 over sine 15, divided by sine 15. When you do that, you get, round to the nearest tenth, 185.5 yards. Okay, number 6. Let's take a look at that. Another tangent ratio problem. We have a right triangle. We have x. We have 114. Or no, I'm sorry, we just have 14. And my angle is 26. So in relationship to this angle, here's my right angle, this is going to be my hypotenuse, and 14 is adjacent. It's next to that. That's going to be the cosine ratio. So the cosine of my angle, which is 26, is equal to the adjacent leg, or adjacent segment, 14, over the hypotenuse, x. Okay, very similar to the previous problem. Shortcut tells you that x is going to be 14 over divided by cosine of 26. Rounded in your calculator, you should get 15.6 as your answer. Okay, number 17, we've got a triangle with 15 here, 15 here, x, and then a whole length of 15. This is a right angle. Well, if they're it's going to be an isosceles triangle. So we have, and actually that should be 18. These segments are congruent. This segment is divided by this altitude. So that means that each segment is 9. That leaves me with a right triangle, x, 15, and 9. And if I can, since it's a right triangle, I can use the Pythagorean theorem, x squared plus 9 squared equals 15 squared, to solve for x. That should be plus, sorry about that. 225. Subtract 81 from both sides. X squared equals 144. Square root of both sides, x equals 12. Here we are looking for the missing angle. In relationship to this angle, 17 is the hypotenuse, it's opposite the right angle, and 8 is opposite. So that's going to be the sine ratio, but remember, if I'm looking for the angle, I'm going to use the sine inverse. Then I use my sine ratio of opposite over hypotenuse. When you plug that in your calculator, round it to the nearest degree, you should get 28 degrees. Okay, next one. Here we have a triangle. Notice that has an altitude here. And this is actually a geometric mean question. We're looking for the length of this altitude. And if you recall, the altitude, x, is equal, it is the geometric mean of these two segments. Square root of that product, 11 times 13. So you just take the square root of that. X equals radical 143, rounded to the nearest tenth, it also equals 12.0. Now just to help you out, if we were looking for a leg, remember the leg, y, would be equal to this segment times the entire segment, which would be 24. And that would be your answer. That would be your length of y. That's when you're looking for the legs. The leg is the geometric mean, so it's the square root of the product of the closest segment and then the whole segment. And the last question, what we've got is a vector. Well, it forms a right angle. 37 is my angle, and my hypotenuse would be 54. So in relationship to this angle, this is the hypotenuse, x is going to be adjacent, and y coordinate is going to be opposite. So the sine ratio of 37 is equal to the sine of 37 is equal to the sine ratio of opposite, which is y, over hypotenuse, which is 54. And then to solve for x, cosine ratio, because it's adjacent, the x is adjacent, of 37 degrees is equal to my adjacent x over hypotenuse 54. Okay? Then we would just multiply times 54. So y equals 54 times sine of 37, which we should get 32.5. And then we should multiply by 54 here, multiply by 54 here. So x equals 54 times the cosine of 37, which you should get 43.1. Those are your x and y coordinates. All right, that's part 2 of the review. Hopefully that helps.